So, hello everyone, and welcome to the Alden Kindred's presentation of the Massachusetts Sixpence of 1652, a rare archaeological find at the Alden home site. My name is Desiree Mobed, and I'm the executive director. The Alden Kindred of America preserves and shares the legacy of Mayflower passengers, John and Priscilla Alden, at their home site in Duxbury, Massachusetts, through educational programs like this, guided tours, genealogy research, and publications. I'd like to offer a special welcome to our members who are joining us today, whose support makes programs like this possible. If you're interested in the Alden Kindred, please visit us at alden.org. On this beautiful but chilly January afternoon, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Alan Stahl, Curator of Numismatics at Princeton University, and he will be presenting this talk about the intriguing silver sixpence bearing the date of 1652 that was uncovered at the Alden home site during an archaeological dig in 1960. He will also explore the context of coinage and other types of money circulating in the Massachusetts Bay Colony to the initiation of federal coinage in 1792. Dr. Stahl is a medieval historian whose specialties include coinage and monetary history. He has recently published a similar coin find from the excavation of the Nickerson family home site in Chatham, Massachusetts, in the Journal of Early American Numismatics. And after the talk, we encourage you to ask questions and put them into the question and answer function. If you would like to share this program or you have to leave, a recording will be posted on the Alden website. And now let's welcome Alan Stahl.
Well, thank you, Desiree. I'm glad to be there, although of course I'm not actually there. And I'm here to talk today about a coin dated 1652 that was found in the excavation, as you've heard, of the first Alden home. Now, you probably all are familiar with this building, the second Alden house in Duxbury. And there's a sort of legendary history of the house, that it was built in 1653 after the first house that the Aldens lived in burned down. And the coin that we're talking about today is actually a key bit of evidence in the question of when did the first house stop being used, when was the second house built, and were they occupied perhaps to both of them for a while. So the first Alden house, which is on a site nearby the present one, on the same grounds, was excavated in 1960. And here you see the whole excavation. In the front, you see is a root cellar or some sort of cellar that comes off of the main floor. And here we are at the main floor, just about a foot below ground level. So we really have two structures here. We have the house itself, which was about 38 feet by 10.5 feet. And we have dug into it this root cellar, which goes down much deeper. Now, the coin we're talking about was actually found in the house itself. And it says New England, anno, that is year 1652, and 6 for sixpence. There were two other coins found in the excavation, both in the root cellar, which were both copper English farthings of the period 1625 to 1649, that is, of King Charles I of England. Now, it doesn't seem to have occurred to the excavators that finding a coin dated 1652 would be rather unlikely in a house that burned down in 1653 and was abandoned, or was abandoned without being burned down. In the excavation, they found no trace of burning, no burnt wood or charcoal or anything. So the legendary idea that the original house burned down, I think, has to be rejected. But it would be quite coincidental for a coin to be minted in 1652 and end up in the floor of a building that was abandoned in 1653. So just on the face of it, that makes the standard chronology difficult to maintain of the small house, the old house, being abandoned in 1653 and the new house being built then, or as was speculated even, that the old house was lifted off of its foundation and brought up the hill a bit to the site of the new house, and the new house was built around the old one, all of this in 1653. So let's take a look at the coinage of this period, and we'll discover actually that the 1652 is a red herring. The coin actually was minted considerably after 1652. We'll start by looking at the coinage of Charles I of England. Now we see there are a couple gold coins too, but we see the complete array of the silver minted in his name, going from the pound, which is 20 shillings, and each shilling is 12 pence, to the crown, which is 5 shillings, and then down to smaller coins of 12 pence, 6 pence, 4 pence, tuppence, and a penny. And you'll see that on the coins, they have the denomination number, that is XII on the shilling for 12 pence, VI for 6 pence. And some of these coins have the actual date of minting, like the pound is 1642. The other ones, actually, we can't date that closely. And you see there is one copper coin included here, which is a farthing, that is 1/4 penny. The penny itself was silver. There were no halfpennies minted in this period. Now, all of this is important because as part of the colonial mission of England, they didn't want their precious silver coins, let alone the gold ones, to leak out to the colonies. The most the colonies were allowed was copper coinage, and even that, not very much. So let's look at the copper coin found here. And as I said, it's a farthing. It's rather difficult for me from this photo to see what's going on, but with much perseverance, I did manage to line it up with a standard image of a Charles I farthing. This is not found at the Alden House. This is in a collection. And it says Charles, King of England and France, basically, with a crown and the harp representing Ireland. Now, as I said, it's difficult from this picture, and we are trying to get better pictures made of this coin. You see, they actually wrote on the reverse of it where it was found. It's nice to know where it was found, but it's not normal numismatic practice to actually write things on the coin. So, and there were 2 of them. I haven't even seen a picture of the second, but eventually we will. And when I get to publishing this find, you'll see that it's all in beautiful order. Now, as I said, the English did not want their colonials to have silver coinage. And this actually, from the period of the Pilgrims from 1620 up to the American Revolution 150 years later, was one of the chief complaints of the colonists, that they were denied silver coinage. Therefore, it was very difficult for them to have an economy. And that was, of course, what the British wanted. They wanted the Americans to do all of their economic dealings directly with England and not with each other, or more importantly, not with the French to the north or the Spanish to the south. So it was a purpose, what we call a mercantile policy of England, to keep the colonies from having silver coins. And we can contrast this with France, which for Canada, French Canada in this period, made a special coinage, a special silver coinage for the use in French Canada, Quebec. In Mexico, they found huge amounts of silver, and they made this piece of 8 or 8 reales coins, which circulated not only in Mexico and in the Spanish lands, but actually circulated rather heavily in the English colonies, because it was a local silver coinage that was available to the English colonies, unlike, as I've said, the English minted coin. In fact, the piece of 8 of Mexico became known in the colonies as the Spanish dollar, and that's what fixed our currency when we finally made it in the 18th century on the dollar as the base denomination, rather than the pound, which was English, because at this period we didn't really want to take much from England. But as you may know, something very dramatic happened to Charles I. He was removed from the throne in 1649 and replaced by the Commonwealth, which was in origin a Protestant Puritan regime. But the colonists, only in Massachusetts, not anywhere else, took advantage of the fact that there was no king making royal coinage to decide that it would make its own silver coinage. And here we have the 1652 Massachusetts Coinage Act, a longhand proposal draft of it, and we can see that this follows this, to be coined into 12 pence, 6 pence, and 3 pence pieces, and what will be stamped on it, and the figures 12, 6, and 3 on it. So basically, the colonists in Massachusetts said, well, as long as there's no king in England, there's no reason why we can't make our own coinage, because it was only the English king which had forbidden the minting of coinage in the colonies. And the Commonwealth hadn't taken a stand, so it was this idea of the coinage was snuck through more or less in Massachusetts, and none of the other colonies followed suit. None of the other colonies issued silver coins or any coins in this period. And here we have the coins that were first issued, NE standing for New England, 12 pence, 6 pence, 3 pence. You can't really get a more simple coinage, a more basic coinage. These were pieces of silver that were hammered and cut into circular shape, and you can see punched with one punch on the obverse, what we call the obverse, the front, saying NE, and on the reverse, VI. Well, this primitive type of coinage did not meet the standards of the Massachusetts Assembly, and they, before the end of 1652, got a mint set up that would mint more recognizable coins, that is, more pieces of metal that were recognizable as a coinage. And here we have Massachusetts in New England. On the obverse, a picture of a tree. In this case, it's a willow tree. And on the reverse, the date, 1652, and the denomination VI, or XII, or III for threepence. Now, this coinage was honest in the beginning. That is, it said 1652, and the first pieces of it were minted in 1652. However, it kept being minted looking like this with the date 1652 until 1660. Now, why was that? Well, in 1652, the Commonwealth got around to minting coins. That is, Cromwell and his associates who were running the English government did a coinage. No image of Cromwell the Protector, rather just symbols on it, but at least the Commonwealth was issuing a coinage. And as you recall, the Commonwealth was made up of Protestant Puritans, as was the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So they couldn't ignore the Commonwealth the way they could, say, a king. So what they did was they kept minting the coins with the date 1652. And they could say, well, this was okay because it was authorized before there was a government that forbid it. Now, in 1660, they decided to keep the coinage going with a slight change. Instead of a willow tree, they put an oak tree on it. And it still says Massachusetts in New England and Anno Domini, year of the Lord, 1652 and 12. So this oak tree coinage went from 1660 to 1666. Then we had the large pine tree coinage going from 1667 to 1674, and finishing with the small pine tree coinage only in the shilling denomination, 1675 to 1682. So in 1682, the coin that was being issued by Massachusetts was still dated 1652. Now let's take a look at the one found in Alden House. And it's a sixpence. You can see the 6, dated 1652. Again, the reverse, somebody put a label on it. When the label was taken off, it affected the color, but the coin itself is very legible. And it corresponds exactly with specimens known. It is an oak tree sixpence, therefore minted from 1660 to 1667. Here is an example in the American Numismatic Society, the largest collection of coinage in the United States. And if you look carefully, you can see not only is it the same type of coin, it's actually from the same dies. Coins were struck from an upper die that was held in the hand and a lower die that was fixed in an anvil, and then the piece of silver was put between them. There's actually some reservation on some of these pieces, which were made with an experimental roller die, but I don't think we need to go into that. But you see, comparing the shape of the letter E, the L, the lazy A, and the way it sort of is spaced so it sneaks in a little under the L on that side, which we'll call the reverse. No one's really sure which is the obverse and which is the reverse in this series. And then Massachusetts in New England. And again, the strange S here the A. So there's no question that this piece is in the series that's very well known of oak tree coinage. Okay, so I've made a little map of all of the finds that I'm aware of coins of Massachusetts, of New England, that bear the date 1652. So that could be the original one with just the little stamp, and it could be the willow tree or the pine tree or the oak tree. And we see, not surprising, a cluster of coin finds around Boston and around Plymouth. And we see here is Duxbury, and as we'll get to in a minute, this is Chatham on Cape Cod. Surprisingly few of these, in fact, only one, and that was a recent find on Cape Cod. So for whatever reason, Cape Cod doesn't seem to be a place where these coins went, and a surprising number actually going west into the Springfield, Hartford area, and even up into the Albany area. Because remember, this was the only silver coinage that was circulating, except for some Mexican pieces of 8. So the other colonists were eager to get these coins and use these coins because it was very convenient. They didn't go ahead and mint their own. For one thing, they didn't take advantage of the lack of monarchy in 1652 to declare their right to make their own coinage. So as you've heard, I recently published a coin found in Chatham in the Nickerson house. Nickerson is very much like Alden, that is, it is maintained by a not-for-profit group that primarily consists of descendants of the Nickerson family who settled in Chatham. And when we compare it, actually, surprisingly enough, it is also from the same dies as the Alden House one. Again, we can see the A, the very distinctive A here, and the S here. Just for those of you who know and care about details of coinage, we see here on the Nickerson piece, however, something that doesn't belong. There's an N poking through here. There's no N in Massachusetts. And what is that from? Well, it turns out that when they were striking the oak tree coinage, they sometimes took earlier coinages, and rather than melting the silver and starting from scratch, they just took an old coin and stamped on it with the new dies. And it turns out, and it takes a little bit of work with magnification and the like, that this coin blank originally held a 12 pence, that is a shilling, which was overstruck to make it 6 pence. In other words, the minters took a coin worth 12 pennies and issued it as 6 pennies, thereby sort of profiting from it. There were a few other coins found in the Chatham excavation. All of the type that we've seen, or copper coins from earlier than this period. So I said, this coinage was made from 1652 to 1682 with all the different kinds of trees. And then it stopped being made. There was the restoration of the royalty, Charles II, James II, on the throne of England, and they cracked down and didn't allow Massachusetts to keep coining, even if it put the fictitious date of 1652 on the coins. So then there's this long period from about 1680 to almost the Revolution, almost 1776, when there's no coinage being created in the American colonies, but Britain still restricting the export of silver to the colonies. So one thing is, as I've mentioned, the Spanish silver coinage started circulating here, as did to some extent the French silver coinage for Quebec. Eventually, the American colonies, just before and after the Revolution, issued paper money. And so this is a 2-pence paper money issued in Boston in October of 1778. And it was printed by Paul Revere, who had the contract from first the colony of Massachusetts, and then after 1776, the state of Massachusetts, to print paper money. And we actually see a tree on it. I think this is a pine tree. So they remember their old coinage, their pine tree shillings. And when they're making a new form of money, they reproduced it. Eventually, under the Articles of Confederation, which is the government of the United States from the time of the Revolution until the adoption of the Constitution, 1789, under the Articles of Confederation, states were allowed to issue copper coins. Still no silver being minted on the North American continent, but they issued copper. And here we almost every state issued a copper coin in this period. So Massachusetts wasn't alone, but here we have a beautiful halfpenny of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts from 1787. There was also we can't call it a federal coinage. It was a coinage of the national government under the Articles of Confederation, again, only copper. And this is called a Fugio cent because it has the word Fugio. Some of you may recognize this. This is the timepiece, the sundial, that was sketched by Ben Franklin in his Poor Richard's Almanac, with a picture of the sun and the term Fugio, I flee, that is, time flees. Mind your business. Now, that's not mind your business in the sense that we would say, don't bother me. It means literally take care of business because time is flying. Ben Franklin was a great believer in individual initiative and the need for people to actually further themselves and not waste time. So this became the national coinage in 1787 under the Articles of Confederation. We are one United States, and it's hard to see on this specimen, but each of these 13 rings has the name of one of the original states. Still copper, still under the Articles of Confederation. Finally, we get to the Constitution, the new government with stronger central power set up under the Constitution, which finally gave the federal government the responsibility and the duty of striking silver coins for circulation in the United States. This coinage decree was passed right at the beginning of the national government under the Constitution. but there were a lot of delays in setting up the mint. And George Washington had to appear before Congress in January of 1793 for the State of the Union. The State of the Union used to be in January. And he was expected to tell the Senate and House that the mint was set up and working as promised. And as December approached of 1792, they still didn't have a mint set up. So George Washington personally took some of his silverware, or as we say, Martha's silverware, took it to a local person who had in his blacksmith shop or in his own shop the ability to strike a few small coins, and they produced this half dime, which is the first silver coinage minted in America, 1792. That's 140 years after the first Massachusetts New England cent. These were issued in very small numbers and are quite valuable. I'm proud to say this is the example in Princeton, which is the finest known. In 1793, they actually got the mint going. It started with copper, as we see here, what we call the large cent, the flowing hair large cent. And finally, in 1794, the United States Mint was capable of minting silver and issued the first silver dollar. So going back to the Alden story, let's take it back. To our old original excavated house. So this coin dated 1652, which would have been rather tight if the original house was abandoned in 1653. This wasn't made until 20 years later, we now know. This type of New England sixpence. So therefore, it's pretty incontrovertible that the original house served some function as late as 1670. And the new house may have been started. I understand there's been a fair amount of dendrochronology work looking at the rafters of the new house to try to figure out when the wood was felled that was used to build the various rooms of the new house. And as far as I know, it's still an open question of exactly when the new house was built and when the old house was abandoned, and whether they might both have been used simultaneously. So that brings me to the end of my story. I will stop sharing the screen, but we'll get back to it if there are questions that we need to show slides for.
Thank you very much, Alan. There are actually a number of questions coming in, and I want to thank you for that really interesting and fascinating presentation. So the first question came in from Elizabeth, and that is, was there a penalty if a colonist was found in possession of silver coins?
It's a good question. I don't think so. Possession, I don't think. But if the minter of silver coins anywhere outside the Tower of London or outside the official English mints, if anyone minted a silver coin, that would constitute counterfeit. And in this period, to counterfeit is death, was the saying. So yeah, if they were caught issuing coins, when they weren't supposed to. That is, when there was a monarch in England, it would have been pretty dangerous for the colonists. But as far as I know, there never was any attempt to punish them for doing it in 1652, or even continuing to do the 1652 coinage for a couple decades.
So Elizabeth also asked, and as have many of our visitors when we show them the coins that we have in the archaeological exhibit, they always want to know, well, what could you buy with a coin? You know, sort of get a sense of the value. And when we've looked through probate inventories, trying to match up sixpence, 12 pence, we just love to hear your thoughts on that. So what could you get for a sixpence?
I wouldn't put it so much in terms of what you could get as what this would represent to a working person. And in general, sixpence, I would say, would be a day's wages for a reasonably skilled worker, tuppence for a totally unskilled worker. So if you think in those terms, you can then say, okay, so it would buy enough to feed a family for one day.
So another question came in from Peggy, and that was, what was the first coin made of? And Peggy, I'm assuming that you meant here in the colonies. So how about that, Alan?
Okay, look, it's silver. All of these coins that bear the date 1652 are good silver, if not 100% silver, probably sterling silver, which is what the British coins were in this period, 92.5% silver, the rest copper. But these were silver coins.
And Michael asked the significance of using trees on the 1652 Massachusetts coins as opposed to another image.
Well, obviously, they weren't going to put in a person. And that's what, as we see from the English coinage and pretty much all others, except when Cromwell started issuing coins, that would be the normal. I don't know about the tree, and I leave it to cultural historians to try to figure out why a tree would have been considered the symbol for New England. Now, of course, the minting resolution doesn't say what to put on it, other than stamping it with NE and the 12, 6, and 3. And as we recall, the first coins had no image. But what induced them to go from this coin to the willow tree, I don't know, frankly.
So another question comes in from Frank, which is, the Alden sixpence appears to be fairly well preserved. My question is, when the coin was found, was it in contact with the soil or in a container, thus protecting it? Frank, that was a question that I think I may have asked Alan and our curator who did our archaeological exhibit. We look at many of the artifacts and they are all, pretty deteriorated. And here's this shiny, nice, pretty coin. We think perhaps in 1960, they may have cleaned it up. We don't have any other thoughts on that. Alan, how about you?
Yeah, it is very well preserved. Of course, silver would corrode less than copper, so it's not surprising that the copper farthings are more corroded than the silver sixpence, but silver does react with a lot of different elements in the subterranean environment, and it was found in context in soil, not in a container, as far as I can tell from the excavation report, and I'm sure they would have mentioned it. So yeah, it's actually surprisingly nice. And I was pleased that it was this nice, because then I can actually match up the dies and make sure that it's a legitimate piece. There are copies of these things floating around, both old copies and modern copies. And, you know, it's nice to know that this one is authentic.
Yes. Yes, I would be, we were very pleased to be able to get such a quality photo of it. And I would be remiss if I didn't add, and I was going to put this at the end, that you can actually purchase a sixpence for you, a reproduction of the Alden coin. And we'll share a little bit more about that later. But from Margot, a question about, can you speak about Charles II's rebuke of Massachusetts in 1678-79 for minting coinage, when Stoughton and is it Bulkley, sorry, went to London to speak with the king on behalf of Massachusetts about something else?
Well, I'm afraid that she knows more about that than I do. It's not a story I've looked at. So
Yeah, Margot, we'll be happy to try to look into that for you and see if we can find out more information. So from Sharon, she asks, colonists' wills show the monetary value of the deceased in pounds in their probate records. How was this determined when they did not use coinage, this coinage? That's a good question.
it's a good question. I mean, there was still money, but I mean, everything had a value, and it may have been that they actually were settling their accounts in Spanish dollars, in pieces of 8, or in French. But yeah, it was hard for the colonists without a circulating currency, but they still did have a monetary system where you could assign a value to things. And as they were part of Britain, they would have used the pound, shilling, pence denominational system.
Can you talk a little bit more on what coins would have meant to someone like John Alden? We know he certainly would have continued with his, as a cooper. So he would have been selling barrels and so forth. But just, having those coins, or those coins being found at his home site, how that just was part of his business world and activities.
Yeah, when I made the map of coin finds, I was actually surprised by how many coins are published as having been found, coins of this series, because only a tiny percentage of coins that were used would end up in the ground in an archaeological context. And we have to say that there may well have been some that were dug up by accident or using metal detectors, which have not been published, not been reported to the authorities. And actually, both the Nickerson coin I published 2 years ago, the Alden coin is not published. So there must have been a lot of these floating around. We have, as I said, we've studied the dies of these, and for some of the series, there are a dozen dies. Each die could make 20,000 coins. So with this 1652 coinage being minted every year for about 20 years, actually there does seem to have been a decent amount of coinage in the colonies, or in the Massachusetts colony, as we see it spread a little bit into Connecticut, New Hampshire, New York, and they must have been very envious because they had nothing like it.
So from Greg comes a question, or yes, a question and he says, I am an avid metal detectorist and always thrilled to see a tree coin found and posted on the forums. Were any of the coins you plotted found by detectorists?
Yeah, I took this from a book published about 10 years ago that brought together all known finds, including those by detectorists, those by archaeological excavation, and those that, say, turned up when someone was digging the foundation for a new building. The key, of course, is it has to be reported and published on something like a detectorist's site or a numismatic publication. Otherwise, it gets lost to history, and making maps like this wouldn't be possible without coins as they're found being made public.
So from Nancy comes the question, a request to speak about lead trading coins that were found in New England.
Well, these wouldn't be coins. These would be what we would call tokens. That is, coin by definition is made by a political authority, be it a colony or a state or a monarch or a commonwealth. We only call things coins if they are officially made by the government. There were other things circulating. There were tokens, lead and copper tokens circulating. There was wampum, Indian wampum. It's not an indigenous Native American institution. They didn't use it as the basis of a monetary economy. But once the colonists came in, they started making these strings of beads, specifically to be used as a token currency. So there were wampum, there were lead tokens, there were copper tokens, some made here in the colonies. There were a lot of copper tokens made in England itself. As you recall from the breakdown I did for Charles I, there was a silver penny and then a copper farthing, no halfpennies minted by the royal government in this period, but there were copper halfpennies and copper pennies minted privately by merchants, by traders, by manufacturers. Again, even in England, there was a shortage of currency. So tokens had to be made, and you'd prefer to use a coin because the coin was backed by a national or a local government. But you'd take a token as payment as long as you felt you could then spend it.
So we have a clarification request from Libby, and actually Libby is one of our brand new members. So hello, Libby. We do have, as I mentioned, Alan, several members joining us today, and I also want to say hi to everyone else who's joining us from all over the country, actually. Washington State and Michigan. Our board president from Connecticut is here, and even in England. So it's fun to see all of the many places that people are coming from. So, but back to Libby's question here. She just wants to clarify that the date of this Alden House oak tree sixpence. She said, understanding, was it minted between 1660 and 1667, or, was it as late as 1670?
It's really 1667 is the end.
Okay.
Yeah, if I said 1670, I was being approximate. But this, as far as research shows, and research on this coinage has been ongoing for about 150 years. And there's some 19th century works on this coinage that are really very good. The original dye study was done in the 19th century. And the dating of 1660 to 1667 is pretty strong. So the coin found in the old Alden house would have been minted between 1660 and 1667. Now, generally, of course, you have to give a coin a certain amount of time to circulate before it gets lost on a floor and covered up by dirt. As I recall, they never found any flooring in the old house excavation, neither wood nor brick. So it looks like it was a dirt floor, and it's easier to lose a coin in that. But even so, it couldn't have been lost before 1660.
So one of our guides likes to joke that Alden had a hole in his pocket that it fell out of. All right, so Gail would like to know about coinage found in Springfield, Massachusetts. There's a family line, Tinkham, from passenger Peter Brown, whose family traveled from Plymouth to Middleborough. Then some went to Connecticut and then settled in Springfield. So back to that is the coinage in Springfield, Massachusetts.
I don't know offhand. As I recall, Springfield is one of the sites that I put a blue dot on the map for, but I'd have to go back to the original list of finds to do that.
So from Michael, the question as to when we started using the dollar as our monetary unit versus the British pound.
Okay, well, this was argued out to some extent in the Federalist Papers. Remember, under the Articles of Confederation, only copper coinage was made, but it was basically in the cent denomination, and cent means 1/100th of a dollar. So as soon as you get coinage in a cent denomination rather than in a penny denomination, you know you've gone from the British 240 pence makes a pound to a new system of the colonists of 100 penny cents to the dollar. And this was, I think Jefferson was the one who pushed most strongly. This was part of the French intellectual pre-revolutionary ideas of rationalization, that it didn't make sense to have a system based on 12 and 20. Why not make it 1 and 100? So it's really in this period between the Revolution and the Constitution that it gets argued whether America, United States of America, will be on a 100 cents to the dollar basis or 240 pence to the pound basis. And there are some banknotes. This one of Paul Revere, you see, is denominated in pence. So it's still in the pence pound system, and you'll get some paper money that will give you a value in pence and in cents, or in pounds and in dollars, so that you could make that conversion. But the conversion in the colonial period and under the Articles of Confederation would have been different for each state, each colony. So what a pound was worth, say, in Massachusetts would have been different from what a pound was worth in Connecticut. If we can think back, those of us who can think back that far, to Europe, when each country had its own coinage system, that's what we were like until the establishment of the national coinage under the Constitution.
All right. Well, this, I think we should start wrapping up, but we have one question I want to make sure I get to, and that is from Nancy, who is a Nickerson descendant, and wanted to know where exactly was the Nickerson coin found in Chatham?
Oh, Chatham is very similar to Duxbury in that there is a large new house, which is what visitors visit. And then, let's see, I'd say it's about 50 feet away. There's an area that's now wooded and sort of swamping. They had to pretty much drain it. That they, after a fair amount of looking around, as they did in Duxbury, they found enough indication of a building underground that they then opened an excavation there. And it's over the past few years, the house itself was excavated, I think about 5 years ago, but they're still doing, there was a palisade around it, which is being mapped, and they're looking for outbuildings.
So I want to go ahead and wrap this up, but as I said, I wanted to also make sure that we had a chance to share the reproduction coin that we had made this past year. And certainly we are, if you're interested, just please contact us through the Alden website, and you too can have a sixpence in your pocket. Alan, I want to thank you.
I'd just like to jump in and say,
I'm
glad to see you put something distinctive on the reverse, so it couldn't pass as a real old coin, because I'm afraid the Nickersons in their reproduction didn't. It says copy somewhere in very small letters, but would be much easier to pass off as a real old coin than yours. So I'm glad to see yours.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Alan. There was a lot of discussion about that. Again, thank you all for joining us today.